So we're looking at Paradise Lost, book 9, where we left off, and we're going to move to the conclusion of Paradise Lost today. And where I left off last time, I said that we need to consider what Milton means by paradise in the same sense that we need to consider what Milton means by hell, because in both cases, it is a geographical, spatial, temporal place in which a real Adam and a real Eve reside. There is a historical Adam, to use the discussion topics of contemporary biblical studies. Milton believes in a historical Adam and Eve. Everybody did. It's not a metaphor for some representative of the herd of animals, as the Darwinists would have it. And there is a place in which they reside called Eden, which Milton will adhere to as well. And those people, that is Adam and Eve, represent, as the federal heads, all of humanity. So when they fall, we all fall. And this is why it's relevant to the contemporary reader as well. We see ourselves implicated in this story about people that we never met from a long, long time ago. But we're all included in Adam, which means that we can't get into the problems created by identity politics of different identity groups, etc., because we're all in the identity group of humanity. I think that's rather liberating, quite frankly, and it is the basis for a Christian anthropology and a Christian view of all sorts of issues of a common human nature. But Adam represents more than just the humanity. Eden also seems to represent something idyllic or ideal. And hell, likewise, something that is of eternal significance. And it's not just a place, because we've already seen that when Satan comes into the world, that namely lands on the earth, having claimed that the mind is its own place and can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven, and says it doesn't matter where he is, because wherever he is, he carries heaven within him. We find the exact opposite is the case. When he's in the presence of Adam and Eve, Milton tells us he carries the hell within him and he can't leave hell. So there's an external hell, if you will, and there's also an internal hell. And that sense of a correspondence between the two is really important, because when Adam and Eve are expelled from paradise, and we will see this shortly, they do so because of their transgression against God. But the consolation is that they will, and these are, I'm anticipating the lines that will come at the end of the study today, they will have a paradise within, happier far, we're told. A paradise within. Satan has a hell within, they will have a paradise within. This will be the consolation, even though they're expelled from paradise, in the knowledge of what Christ will do for them. They nonetheless have some sort of walk with God. And yet it's not represented by the physical world that they go into, and they will also physically die. So there's that play, though, on a paradise within, a paradise without, a hell within, a hell without, is there throughout the work, and it's a literary feature. You could call it a microcosm and a macrocosm, even in some sense, but it doesn't really seem like small and great. It's more internal, external that's going on. But we left off last time, so I'm just anticipating where I'm going to go with this, and I emphasized these things as I went on. That Adam and Eve now have had the beginning of a falling out between them. They're going to disagree about what to do at this point. And one of you rather, I think, astutely observed that it almost sounds like the fall has already happened. And I know what you mean by that, and I've raised the topic myself, and I don't think that that's what's going on here. Because the debate is about what's the nature of Eden, and what would it mean then to disagree and have a genuinely part ways. They're not falling out in the sense that they can't be reconciled. They're talking about prudent counsel here. And Eve is going to push exactly on this point, because Adam has just said, there's an enemy abroad, and you should not leave my side, because I gather strength from your presence, and you likewise, and we're more likely to withstand the fall if we're combined than if we separate. And so don't part from the one from whose side you were created. And she is upset about this and says, I've heard all of this, and I'm upset because you think that I'm not able to withstand the temptation. But that thou shouldst my firmness therefore doubt to God or thee, because we have a foe, may tempt it, I expected not to hear. His violence thou fearest not, being such as we not capable of death or pain, can either not receive or can repel. His fraud is then thy fear, which plain infers thy equal fear that my firm faith and love can by his fraud be shaken or seduced. He's questioning her character, and she's hurt by this. It's a very reasonable response on her part. And so here's the beginning of it. But is this a sinful response, or is it a reasonable response? I'll leave you to decide that for yourselves. I think it's very difficult for us to even make a decision on this, because we are sinners. We imagine ourselves that the offending party, in this case Adam, is somehow wrong-headed in what he says, and she is right in her response, like vice versa. I just don't know. Very difficult, though, and unfallen beings in a situation of conflict where they disagree and are going to part paths, but she will leave, by the way, with his blessing and consent in the end. That's also important here. But he says, with healing words, daughter of God and man, immortal Eve, for such thou art, from sin and blame entire. So in response to your, there's no sin in your response. Not diffident of thee do I dissuade thy absent from my sight, but to avoid the attempt itself intended by our foe. And then he goes in and does, as I said, that he gains influence from her looks, access in every virtue. He's more himself. He's a better man in the presence of Eve. And she must be likewise, because she is his partner and so forth. So it says, let's not even have the attempt here. And she responds, and note that this is Milton's description, so spake domestic Adam in his care and matrimonial love, but Eve, who thought, less attributed to her faith sincere, thus her reply with accent sweet renewed. Now, so here's the condition. Remember back in book 3, we talked about the nature of liberty. God says, I created them sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Such created he all those who bear his image. All the celestial spirits, furthermore, they have freedom. They can choose God, or they can disobey God. And if he says if they're not free, then they won't really be like him, because God creates out of freedom. There's no compulsion in God's nature. He does things out of love, and love requires freedom. So they are in a condition of freedom, and they have to have that freedom to choose, or they're not really in Eden even. They're not who they are said to be. And this is she pushes this point here, because it's a point almost of principle, and it is actually principle. She expresses hurt feelings, but really you're contradicting our rational nature here by what you're saying, Adam. If this be our condition, she says, thus to dwell in narrow circuits straitened by a foe, subtle or violent, we not endued single with like defense, wherever met, how are we happy, still in fear of harm? But harm precedes not sin. Right? Harm comes after sin. Only our foe, tempting, affronts us with his foul esteem of our integrity. His foul esteem sticks no dishonor on our front, but turns foul on himself. Then wherefore shunned or feared by us, who rather double honor gain from his surmise, proved false, and find peace within, favor from heaven, our witness from the event. This is God's own logic. They will gain praise from the choice to choose him. So why are we worried? And what is faith, love, virtue, unassayed? If it's untried, it's not virtuous. There has to be a possibility of temptation and of fault. There has to be that. Without exterior help sustained. Let us not then suspect our happy state, left so imperfect by the Maker wise, as not secure to single or combined. Frail is our happiness, if this be so, and Eden were no Eden, thus exposed. There's no delight here. There's no delight in obeying without the possibility of disobeying. Let's not worry about this. We have everything within us. God himself says it. They're sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. So we don't need to worry about this. And if I can't depart from you, then I'm not in Eden already. I'm already like a chain. You're my chain, in fact. And I don't have the rational mind, which she's clearly demonstrating here. And he's now in trouble. I don't mean in trouble in terms of an argument. What is he going to say? She's made a reasonable point. So again, I say those to the critics that say Eve is like this, I don't know, domestic woman who can't, the little woman who can't think, well, that's not the person that I see talking here. To whom thus Adam fervently replied, "O woman." Now that could sound pejorative. I don't think it's intended to be so. Her name, she is woman. Like if I say to somebody, "Oh, woman," it's always pejorative. She is woman. He is man. They are, right? So it's but maybe it's intended we read it that way. I'm not sure that's what Milton means. "O woman, best are all things as the will of God ordained them. His creating hand nothing imperfect or deficient left. Of all that he created, much less man, or aught that might this happy state secure from outward force." Now here is the important point. Within himself the danger lies, yet lies within his power. Against his will he can receive no harm, but God left free the will, for what obeys reason is free, and reason he made right, but bid her well beware and still erect, lest by some fair appearing good surprise she dictate false. So they can be rationally led astray. They can reason falsely by the appearances of things. To do and misinform the will to do what God expressly hath forbid. Not then mistrust, but tender love enjoins, that I should mind thee oft, and mind thou me. Firm we subsist, yet possible to swerve, since reason not impossibly may meet some specious object by the foe suborn and fall into deception unaware, not keeping strictest laws. So he says, you're better off staying with me. Trial will come unsought. Wouldst thou approve thy conscience, that is, prove constancy, approve first thy obedience, the other who can know. Not seeing thee attempted, who attest. But if thou think trial unsought may find us both securer than thus warned thou seems, go. If you think that we're going to be more secure by going separately, then you go. For thy stay not free absents thee more. Go in thy native innocence, rely on what thou hast of virtue, summon all. For God towards thee hath done his part, do thine. Now, Adam is also justifying God's ways in this situation. Note that it's almost like what happens in Book 3, where the son is speaking on the father's defense about the whole situation, how you gave them free will and the possibility of the fall, etc. Adam is now the defender, not the defender of God, but explaining the situation, why we are created ideally, but you can fall. Don't think that you can't. But he says, go ahead then, because you have free will, and I'm not going to constrain you here if you think that's the best course of action. But I think you're better off just obeying in this situation. And she is not, and this is why I find it funny, is not satisfied that she won the argument. She says, she persists, yet submits, though last replied, with thy permission then. So it's not going to be on my choice. It's you gave me the permission then. That's fine. That's good. And thus forewarned chiefly. Now this is going to be particularly funny when the fall happens and then he blames her and she says, but you let me go. It was your choice. You were the head. You said, okay, go. That was your free will. That was your choice. You could have said, stay. And he's like, ah. And so that what afterwards becomes extremely funny. But at this point, there's nothing wrong with what is said here. It's entirely rational. It's not tainted by sin. It's a rational, entirely acceptable conversation. With thy permission then. And we need to take the sin out of it. She feels that his permission is necessary here. It's an unfallen being. And thus forewarned, chiefly by what thou last reasoning words touched on only, that our trial, when least sought, may find us both perhaps far less prepared. The willinger I go, nor much expect a foe so proud will first the weaker seek. Now this is one of her errors. She assumes that the proud foe will go after the greater of the two, the superior of the two, the stronger of the two. He's not going to go after the weaker of the two because that will bring dishonor to him. She doesn't realize that the devil's no gentleman and doesn't care about stuff like that. And he doesn't even care about them. He's trying to get at God. So he's happy however he can do this. He's even willing to become a snake. It's unthinkable for them that something so repugnant would happen. So bent, the more shall shame him his repulse. Thus saying, this is an important line as well, from her husband's hand, her hand, soft she withdrew. Now you're going to note the hands, and the hands are really important in Paradise Lost as well. It's repeated reference to hands. The way they take hands and they leave hands and what she has in the hand and so forth. Milton is just wonderful little touches here. And so she leaves with this. And the response that takes a little while draws comment from Milton himself. O much deceived, much failing, hapless Eve, of thy presumed return, event perverse, thou never from that hour in paradise foundst either sweet repast or sound repose. Such ambush hid among sweet flowers and shades, waited with hellish rancor, imminent to intercept thy way, or send thee back despoiled of innocence, of faith, of bliss. For now, and since first break of dawn, the fiend, mere serpent in appearance, forth was come, and on his quest, where likeliest he might find the only two of mankind, but in them the whole included race, his purposed prey. The hellish rancor. So in the midst of paradise, hell is there in the person of Satan. And he will deceive them not with an external destructive power, but an internal one. They have to assent to it. They have to be deceived because the internal allegiance to God is more important in some ways than the external, or the two go together rather. Your thoughts lead to your actions. There's an unbroken chain there. Believing without acting is not believing. There has to be an external proof because they're physical beings. Okay, but he's looking, and who's he looking for? He's chiefly hoping for Eve. He wished, but not with hope of what so seldom chance, when to his wish, beyond his hope, Eve separate he spies. Now where is she? Veiled in a cloud of fragrance where she stood, half spied, so thick the roses bushing round about her glowed. This is again wonderful. Oft stooping to support each flower of slender stalk, whose head, though gay carnation, purple azure, or specked with gold, hung drooping unsustained. Them she upstays gently with myrtle band. So you know how flowers, when they're heavy, on the stalk will droop, and then the gardener upstays them, as it says, so that they are upright. She upstays gently with myrtle band, mindless the while herself, though fairest, unsupported flower, from her best prop so far, and storm so nigh. So there's a flower in the midst of the flowers that doesn't have a myrtle band to keep her upright when the storm comes, and he is the storm. It's just a magnificent way of amplifying the suspense. But we already know the outcome of it. Nearer he drew, and many a walk traversed of stateliest covert, cedar, pine, or palm, then voluble and bold, now hid, now seen, among thick woven arborets and flowers embroidered on each bank, the hand of Eve, spot more delicious than those gardens fain. Now her hand will be compared to a garden. Mentioned in antiquity, there'll be a whole list of an epic catalog of gardens famous in ancient literature. That's how wonderful is Eve's hand in the garden, the hand that upstays the rose. She who is the rose in the midst of the rose is upstaying that. So these wonderful catalog of images here. Her heavenly form angelic and more soft and feminine, her graceful innocence, for every air of gesture or lest action overawed his malice. So here's the problem. In the midst of this, he wants to destroy her, and yet he sees her so graceful that for one moment, that space, his fierceness of the fierce intent it brought, he was bereft of it. That space, the evil one abstracted stood from his own evil, and for the time remained stupidly good. He never became good, but he was stupefied into goodness. He could not do what he wanted to do. There's a potency in goodness that overawes the evil. In John's gospel, it says that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness hasn't comprehended it. It can't. It just like Tolkien's the Phial of Galadriel, in the place where all the lights go out, and the light pushes him back. Same thing here. There's a potency about her. Of enmity disarmed, of guile, of hate, of envy, of revenge, all the things that he swore he was motivated by. But the hot hell that always in him burns, though in mid-heaven, soon ended his delight, and tortures him now more, the more he sees of pleasure not for him ordained. Then soon fierce hate he recollects, and all his thoughts of mischief gratulating thus excites. So isn't it splendid? The interplay and the motive of hell and evil, which is just solely destructive. And what I said to you in Milton's, or rather C.S. Lewis's comment on Paradise Lost, this is the Augustinian portrait of evil. It's the absence of good. It's a privation of the good. You need to wed your theology with the portrait that he's painting for us here. So he says to himself, thoughts, whither have ye led me? And with what sweet compulsion thus transported to forget what hither brought us? Hate, not love, nor hope of paradise. For hell, hope here to taste of pleasure? But all pleasure to destroy, save what is in destroying. Other joy to me is lost. Then let me not pass occasion, which now smiles. Behold alone the woman, opportune to all attempts. Her husband, for I view far round, not nigh, whose higher intellectual more I shun, and strength, of courage haughty, and of limb heroic built, though of terrestrial mold, foe not informidable, exempt from wound. Now here's one of my questions here. Adam is said to have a higher intellectual. What exactly does that mean here? It's not been demonstrated in any way in the poem. Eve has shown herself equal to Adam in intellectual matters. Where does Milton get this thought from? It does say in Scripture that Adam is Eve's superior in certain respects, but it's not clarified what is meant by that. He's her head. So it may be in that sense. But do we mean intellect by that? Milton pushes it in that direction. It's not been demonstrated in the poem in any way. It's not asserted in Scripture. It's more a question of hierarchy than it is of intellect. But Milton pushes it in the direction of intellect. I'm not sure where he gets this from, quite frankly. Other than that, it was Eve that was deceived and not Adam, it says that in Scripture. And that's the reason. But is the ground of the deception her lesser intellect? I actually am not sure that we're going to find an answer. But it is said in Scripture, it was Eve that was deceived and not Adam. And the assumption here on Milton's part is because there was an intellectual inferiority in Eve that Milton's poem is not demonstrated, and we don't actually even see clearly articulated in Scripture. It's just but there's something there. Is it is it just simply headship, leadership? Because the Genesis passage might bear that out more. Remember, the serpent speaks to Eve, Adam's standing there, and he's not doing anything. Then she gives him the apple, and then he eats of it. So it was a failure to intervene on his part. But she was deceived and not he. Well, if he wasn't deceived, what's his culpability then? He's not deceived. Okay, fine. So what is the culpability then? Because he let it happen. If he's standing right there, he doesn't say, like, Eve, like, knock it out of her hand or something. Don't take the apple. Don't listen to him if he's not fooled. So there's a lot of problems in the text and challenge for us. I think he wanted Eve to take it, myself. He approved of it. He just wasn't deceived. That's a bigger problem in some ways. At least she was fooled. He was not fooled. Yes?
In the previous chapter, or maybe 7, when Adam is speaking with Uriel, doesn't Uriel say, I don't recall that he said anything about intellect, but more so about spiritual strength, or spiritual purity, I think it was, what he said. Isn't that more so what?
Why I don't even know what that means either exactly, because they're both made in God's image and they're both perfect but not immutable.
I was just saying that in relation to what you said regarding his push on the intellect.
Well, that's this passage here, right? The higher intellectual.
So I'm just curious why now he's saying intellect, whereas before he was not.
Yeah, I don't know either. And what's interesting is, remember, this is Satan's vantage point. It's not taken as an objective statement that he is actually of higher intellect. Maybe he's assuming things that are actually not true. We haven't, as I say in the text, there's no evidence that Eve is intellectually inferior. We've just seen her use her reason and present a perfectly defensible position, and he gives ground on it and says, okay, then go. And she says, with your permission then. Okay. But it's not that I've seen no evidence of higher intellectual. Remember, I view, who's the speaker? Satan. That's how he perceives it. Is that actually the state of affairs? Milton has been charged with being a misogynist for this. I would say, who's the speaker? And is his vantage supposed to be taken as biblical or authoritative? He's not getting it from Scripture. Other than that Eve was deceived and not Adam. But again, that's not explained in terms of intellect. It may be or it may not be. I'm just saying. I'm not sure where Milton gets this from exactly. And she, on the other hand, let's just carry on with this now, says so much, she is fair, divinely fair, fit love for God's, not terrible, though terror be in love, and beauty, not approached by stronger hate, hate stronger under show of life, love well feigned, the way which to her ruin now I tend. Hate is stronger, but only if it masks itself in love, and she expects love. This is a reasonable thing. In Eden, she's going to experience nothing but love. Of course, God created Eden. It's going to be filled and motivated by love, so he better not demonstrate hate, or he's not going to bring her to bring herself down. He has to do it through the guise of love. It's an angel or a demon cloaking itself as an angel of light. Right? So spake the enemy of mankind, enclosed in serpent, inmate bad, and toward Eve addressed his way, not with indented wave, so prone on the ground as since, so he's not crawling on his belly going back and forth, but on his rear, so he's up in like a spiral coil, as if he were standing upright. This is a different sort of serpent. He still does the little shifty thing, but he's upright. Fold above fold, a surging maze, his head. Now this word maze is also repeatedly used here. And note the uses of the maze. He's going to amaze her. He's going to get her lost. In his arguments, his head crusted aloft, carbuncles his eyes, and he appears, and now we get a whole catalog of different types of serpents that have come up in pagan literature. And I'll skip over all those. And the Circean call, etc., and he licks the ground and gets her attention, and she's saying, like, what's with this? The snake's really acting funny today. And she sees him and thinks this is amusing. And then he speaks with his fraudulent temptation. Wonder not, sovereign mistress, if perhaps thou canst, who art sole wonder. A little bit of praise. Always a way in here. Much less arm thy looks, the heaven of mildness with disdain, displeased that I approach thee thus, and gaze insatiate, I the single, nor have feared thy awful brow, more awful, thus retired, fairest resemblance of thy Maker fair. Thee all things living gaze on, all things thine by gift, and thy celestial beauty adore, with ravishment beheld. There best beheld, where universally admired. Okay, so here's the appeal. Everyone admires you, but that's only those who get to see you. But not everyone gets to see you. Love is appropriate, given your resemblance to the Maker fair. She bears God's image, but there's something about her which is more a resemblance. And so, she's being deprived of something which is universal approval. So we appeal to her vanity. But her vanity is not a fallen thing. It's appropriate. She is the fairest of all God's creatures. It's been said repeatedly. And she says, there best beheld, where universally admired. But here in this enclosure, while these beasts among, beholders rude, and shallow to discern half what in thee is fair, one man except, who sees thee, and what is one? Who shouldst be seen a goddess among gods, adored and served by angels numberless, thy daily train. So he's praising her, and we would say appealing to her vanity, but she has as yet no vanity. Vanity is a consequence of sin. She's not looking at herself in the water and thinking, wow. Although that was what, when she was created, that was the image that was given her. She was like the pagan image that Ovid gives us of Narcissus. He looks in the water and sees a beautiful youth and thinks, I've never seen someone so beautiful. I don't want to look up. And the nymphs are all looking at Narcissus, and eventually falls in the pool and drowns and dies. Okay. She's not that, although she was that when she was created, and then she hears Adam's voice and so forth. Anyway. But she's not given to the what we would call the vice of narcissism. But it does appeal to her because it's appropriate in some ways. It's a little bit overpraising, but so glozed the tempter, and his proem tuned into the heart of Eve, his words made way. The most beautiful thing in all of Eden, Eve, right into the center of that center. It's the center of the center. Though at the voice much marveling at length, not unamazed, remember I said the maze, she thus in answer spake, what may this mean? Language of man, pronounced by tongue of brute, and human sense expressed. The first at least of these I thought denied to beasts, whom God on their creation day created mute to all articulate sound. The latter I demur, for in their looks much reason, and their actions oft appears the serpent, subtlest beast of all the field I knew, but not with human voice endued. Redouble then this miracle, and say, how camest thou speakable of mute? And how to me so friendly grown above the rest of brutal kind, that daily are in sight? Say, for such wonder claims attention due. How did you get to speak? To whom the guileful tempter thus replied, Empress of this fair world. Now, she's the king. Now she's the empress. Going to upgrade her a little bit. Of this fair world. She's not just in Eden. He's already said the whole world and the angels, and you should be like a god. Now he's already creating a bridge towards that thought of being like a god. And remember, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil will make them as gods. It's there. God has said it. She knows that. Resplendent easy it is to me to tell thee all what thou commandest, and right thou shouldst be obeyed. I was at first as the other beasts, I was just mute. And then I went and I saw a tree, and I smelled it, and I tasted it, and when I resolved to eat it, I became rather different. Amid the tree now got them plenty tempting so nigh to pluck and eat my fill. I spared not for such pleasure in that hour, at feed or fountain never had I found. Sated at length ere long, I might perceive strange alteration in me, to degree of reason in my inwards powers. So that he moves up the chain of being. He becomes like a man. There's a suggestion of a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy. And he suggests that he has been elevated from brute, like an animal, like Adam, created on the sixth day, but now he ascends upwards. And there's a logical coherence to this, because remember, if Adam eats of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he will become like a god. Well, that's a step up as well. And reason in my inward powers, and speech wanted not long, though to this shape retained. Thenceforth to speculations higher deep I turned my thoughts, and with capacious mind considered all things visible in heaven, or earth, or middle, all things fair and good. But all that fair and good in thy divine semblance and in thy beauty's heavenly ray, united I beheld no fair to thine equivalent or second, which compelled me thus, though importune perhaps, to come and gaze and worship thee, of right declared sovereign of creatures, universal dame. So talked the spirited, sly snake. And Eve, yet more amazed, unwary, thus replied. Note in one line, he can put so much. Serpent, thy overpraising leaves in doubt the virtue of that fruit in thee that first proved. A little rhetorical flourish here that goes beyond the subject matter here. But, say, where grows the tree? From hence how far? For many are the trees of God that grow in paradise, and various yet unknown. To us in such abundant lies our choice. Where is it? And he says, come on with me. I'll take you there. Lead then, said Eve. He, leading swiftly, rolled in tangles, and made intricate seem straight. To mischief swift. Hope elevates and joy brightens his crest. On he goes, and he leads them at some evil spirit through the bogs and the mires, losing her in the path, glistered the dire snake, and into fraud led Eve, our credulous mother, to the tree of prohibition, root of all our woe. Milton is reminding us here that this is not the story of Adam and Eve, this is us. We're implicated in the story. When we really like literature, a film, a TV show, and we identify with the character, we do it to it sort of vicariously. We do it because we like the character. Here, we're in the narrative. Our humanity is involved in this. Like no other creature, like no other admired hero. Eve is us in this. Our lives are on the line. But she spoke to him when she sees what the serpent, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, serpent, we might have spared our coming hither. Fruitless to me, though fruit be here to excess, the credit of whose virtue rest with thee, wondrous indeed of cause of such effects. But of this tree we may not taste nor touch. Does it say that in the biblical text, by the way? Did God say you can't touch? It answers no. It did not say that. But Adam does, it is said, not by God, but by Adam, don't even touch it. Why does he add to the prohibition? Makes God seem a little unreasonable, I think. Don't even touch it. God says don't eat of it, but you can't eat if you don't touch it, so don't touch it. It's like what I say to my kids. Don't even get near the thing, because I don't, you might fall by accident and burn your hand. Just stay away from the fire. I'm not allowing you to roast the marshmallow. Don't even pick up the stick. Stay away. And they're like, come on. This is a little bit much. God so commanded, and left that command sole daughter of his voice. The rest we live law to ourselves. Our reason is our law. So first priority is obedience, and then reason is their law. Everything else, it's the voice of God. Okay, so with that, to whom the tempter guilefully replied, indeed, hath God then said that of the fruit of all these garden trees ye shall not eat? Yet lords declared of all in earth or air. Did he not call you the lords of all things? But you can't eat of any of the trees? Oh, no. God's not that unreasonable. To whom thus Eve, yet sinless, note again, Milton's at pains here, no sin is transpired, of the fruit of each tree in the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of this fair tree amidst the garden God hath said, ye shall not eat thereof, nor shall ye touch it, lest ye die. She scarce had said, though brief, when now more bold, the tempter, but with show of zeal and love to man and indignation at his wrong. Line 666. Book 2, line 666. What happens? We see death, right? At the gate of hell. There's no death here. It's not, but there. It's a moment. I think it's purposive myself. And indignation at his wrong, new part puts on, and as to passion move fluctuates disturbed, yet comely and in act raised, of some great matter to begin, as when of old some orator renowned in Athens or free Rome, where eloquence flourished, since mute, to some great cause addressed, stood in himself collected, while each part, motion, each act one audience ere the tongue, sometimes in height began, as no delay of preface brooking. And what does he do? He acts as a humanitarian. He speaks as a humanitarian. He's offended on mankind's part. This is not just. This is not fair. He says that you're lords, but he forbids you from this trivial thing which has made me like this. It's made me better. It's made me like a god. And godhood should be withheld from you who bears the image of God. How unfair. How senseless. How unreasonable. What a silly little thing. You can't eat of the fruit of a tree that I ate and it made me better and it didn't kill me. This is a meaningless, silly rule and keeping you from what's good. So if it's not, then God is not good. Well, so what does he say? Oh, sacred, wise, and wisdom-giving plant, mother of science, now I feel thy power within me clear, not only to discern things in their causes, but to trace the ways of highest agents. Now I understand the mind of God. Deemed, however, wise, queen of this universe, do not believe those rigid threats of death. Ye shall not die. How should ye? By the fruit, it gives you life by knowledge, life to knowledge. By the threatener, look on me who have touched and tasted, yet both live, and life more perfect have attained than the fate meant me, by venturing higher than my lot. Shall it be shut to man, which to the beast is open, or will God incense his ire for such a petty trespass, and not praise rather your dauntless virtue, whom the pain of death denounced, whatever thing death be, deterred not from achieving what might lead to happier life, knowledge of good and evil. Of good, how just? Of evil, if what is evil be real, why not known, since easier shunned? God therefore cannot hurt ye and be just. Not just, not God. Not feared then, nor obeyed. Your fear itself of death removes the fear. Why then was this forbid? Why but to awe, but to keep ye low and ignorant, his worshippers? He knows that in the day ye eat thereof, your eyes that seem so clear are yet are but dim, shall perfectly be then opened and cleared, and ye shall be as gods, knowing both good and evil, as they know that ye should be as gods, since I, as man, eternal man, is but proportioned meat. I of brute human, ye of human gods. So ye shall die perhaps by putting off human to put on gods. Death to be wished, though threatened, which no worse than this can bring. And what are gods that man may not become as they, participating godlike food? The gods are first, and that advantage used on our belief, that all from them proceeds. I question it. For this fair earth I see, warmed by the sun, producing every kind, them nothing. He speaks like a modern atheist scientist, by the way. I don't see God. Where's God? I see the evidence of a created order, which actually isn't a created order, it's just an order. I see that. I don't see God. It's warmed by the sun. It seems a very good world. That I see. But I don't see them. If they are all things who enclose knowledge of good and evil in this tree, that whoso eats thereof forthwith attains wisdom without their leave. And wherein lies the offense that man should thus attain to know? What can your knowledge hurt him? Or this tree impart against his will, if all be his? This is not his. Says it. Where's the offense? There's a whole heaping of arguments, one after the other, and she gets overwhelmed with the small little points that are being made. Overwhelmed. Yes.
When he's talking about good and evil and knowing good and evil, Adam and Eve know good because they haven't sinned. But they know what evil is
They're not even quite sure what that is.
because they haven't really, like, she's had the disturbing dream and they've talked, and the angels talked with Adam about the battle in heaven. So they know that there's something else, but I guess they don't know in the same way.
They've never experienced it, that's for sure. But they can't even fathom it, because in Augustinian terms, evil is the privation of the good. It's literally nothing. It's the absence of the good. So what is something that's nothing? And they have no experience of it. They have no understanding of it. In a sense, evil is not comprehensible. Like, it's the most irrational thing in the world not to choose God. God ought to be loved and chosen for his goodness, for his glory, for all these things. You would do that. There's no, like, it's a crazy thing to do, an irrational thing, which he nonetheless did. Of his own accord, therefore, he's damned, and so forth, and they'll be deceived, and therefore they'll be forgiven, as we've seen. But there's no reason to do the evil deed. He's giving the form of reason here, but to seduce her to choose to do it and misinform the will, which is what Adam said to her before she left. It's not impossible that you could be tricked. A fair appearing good. So something that appears good, and he's clothing himself in a being that appears to be demonstrating the good effects of evil. But by disobeying God, what is good? Well, it's living in relation to goodness. God is goodness. So living in obedience and in a loving relationship by choice, that is the definition of goodness. To choose something other than that is to turn your back on God and to choose evil. You're turning from something that exists to something that doesn't exist. You're choosing not to be. That's what evil, the implications of evil are so vast, and really it's sort of metaphysical and confusing in a certain sense, very abstract. Although very concrete, we know perfectly well evil consequences when we experience them in the world, very much so. But what is evil? Augustine insists that it's the privation of the good. There's nothing there, really. But it's like a parasite on the good. And the more you look into it, the less good you are. And Satan is, in that sense, nothing. And he's offering them nothing. But the nothing is the absence of God, and God is the essence of everything good. But he says, what can you hurt him? What can your knowledge hurt him? Your knowledge can't hurt him. You will know evil. By knowing evil, you will know nothing for the first time. What's the power of nothing? Well, you tell me what's the power of a vacuum in physical terms. Like a black hole. Pulls everything into it. The only thing greater than that power is the power of light. The heaviest thing in the known universe is right at the center of the sun. It's made of what? What's the sun made out of? Hydrogen. Lightest element in the whole universe. Like in terms of weight. It's the very lightest thing. And the sun's composed of the lightest thing. And it's so heavy there at the center of the sun that the whole of the universe revolves around it. That's how heavy the light is of the sun. The lightest element that burns has a gravity pull that makes us revolve around the solar system. Evil has the opposite effect. It pulls in a sort of different way, but everything gets dragged towards it as well. It's an interesting sort of physical portrait of good and evil in that sense. And for that reason, the sun's often used as a demonstration of or an analogy for what God's like. Yes?
Yeah, just as how you say, little comment on how, because every time I hear this story, like, I start thinking
how's it possible?
One, and second, concepts and comprehension and understanding, right? Because as a thinking being, your comprehension of whatever it is told is never going to be fully as intended, because even though I can express myself to the best of my capabilities, whatever your experiences are is going to be influence all the information that I give you, right? So just thinking about how they were told, like Adam and Eve were told, okay, if you eat this fruit, you will die, right? But then
Just know what that means even.
Exactly, and because they have just been they are just living beings. They are not even comprehending what dying means. They've never experienced it, and they don't plan to, and God doesn't plan to. But then, as a father, that I see God, right, and the concept He's, and how my parents they give me the easiest concept for me to understand something, right? So they don't tell me, for example, you're gonna get burned because of the fire.
They say don't touch it.
They just give me the easiest, like, okay, this, if you touch the fire, you're gonna get pain. I do understand pain, so I'm like, oh, I gotta get away from it, right? And now how God is saying, okay, maybe you won't die like right away, like eat it, drop dead, right? But you will get away from it, and that then I will describe what worse punishment for us than to be away from God.
One of the most confusing things in modern science is they take as life as something that we have, that we possess, that we control to some degree. That's something that we have. But in scriptural terms, to live is to live in relationship with God, and to die is to be cut off from the relationship with God. That's what he's not talking about here. Satan brings death to them. He is death. There's the character of death, but in a sense, he does not live in a loving relationship with God. He's cut off from that. He's turned himself, and he's encouraging them to live in spiritual death. They're not going to physically die right away. Eventually they're going to, but it's a spiritual death. First, it's the way they relate to God. That's what is going to be, it's an internal consequence before an external one. Now, physically they will become mortal. They're now, at this point, they're not mortal. But they will become so. But again, there's complexity here that she doesn't see, in part because she's never experienced death. But what she does know, obey. And that's what he says to her. You just obey. Never mind your reasoning here. Your reasoning can lead you astray, and your reasoning is good, and it's intact, and it obeys your will. But your reason can misinform your will. Don't think your reasoning can do otherwise. And Satan has led her to this. So he ended in his words, replete with guile, full of guile into her heart. 2 easy entrance, 1. Fixed on the fruit she gazed, which to behold might tempt alone. And in her ears the sound yet rung of his persuasive words, impregned with reason. To her seeming and with truth. Meanwhile the hour of noon waked on, and waked an eager appetite raised by the smell, so savory of that fruit, which with desire inclinable now, grown to touch or taste, like the flower, it's lost its prop, it's inclined towards it. Solicit her longing, yet first pausing a while, thus to herself she mused, and she speaks to the plant in her head. Great are thy virtues. Thy praise he also who forbids they use, conceals not from us, naming the tree of knowledge, knowledge both of good and evil. God himself calls it that. Forbids us then to taste, but his forbidding commends thee more, while it infers the good by thee communicated, and our want, our lack. We have no knowledge of this. For good unknown sure is not had, or had and yet unknown is as not had at all. In plain then, what forbids us he but to know? Forbids us good, forbids us to be wise. Such prohibitions by not. So she's going to go through the whole convoluted chain of logic which Satan had presented to her at this point, and he will take this. She will take this, and so saying, her rash hand in evil hour forth, reaching to the fruit she plucked, she eat. Earth felt the wound. In nature, from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe that all was lost. Back to the thicket slunk the guilty serpent, and well might, for Eve intent now wholly on her taste, naught else regarded. Such delight till then. Remember, she's in the Garden of Eden, which means delight. And now she has delight in something other than delight. In fruit she never tasted, whether true or fancied so, though expectation high of knowledge, nor was Godhead from her thought. So this is why it's so tasty. It's not just that it's the tastiest apple she ever ate. She thinks she's going to become a superpower, a goddess. Boy, that really tastes good. And now she's had wine. She's drunk. And what does she do? At this point, she bows down to the tree. Idol worship. Becomes immediately an idolater. Says that I'll offer you praise. And then goes on. And here then, for the first time, she has little second thoughts. And this is also interesting. Adam. In Adam, what sort shall I appear? And what shall I do here? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me, or rather not, but to keep the odds of knowledge in my power, without co-partner, so to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love, and render me more equal. And perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometime superior, for inferior who is free. Okay, here's demonic logic. Satan's own logic. The reason that he was motivated to act against God is because he sensed himself slighted. He thought that the Son of God, the praise that the Son of God got, he should have got. He thought he should be higher. And she presents it in terms of equality. If I'm not superior, then I can't be free. And if I'm not superior, then I am, in some sense, chained. So the appeal to equality is a specious one, and it will be used repeatedly, including in our day, by the way. Equality is always a veil for something else. Yes?
So could this then kind of hark back to what we were talking about earlier, where Satan is speaking and he says about Eve being the weaker or whatever, the intellectual, where it's maybe it is twisted, because it kind of sounds the same as what Eve is saying now.
It does.
Or she is lesser, and so I could see how
But again, this is satanic logic, and she follows the satanic logic.
Right.
Does that mean that it's correct logic or that it's stinking thinking?
Right, that's what I'm kind of pointing out. It's it might be the comment earlier that Milton isn't necessarily saying that women are less intellectual or whatever, but he's just saying it because he's speaking, or Satan's speaking the point.
And now a fallen Eve is thinking the same, along the same lines. And again, it is satanic logic, inferior who's free. better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. That's what Satan says. She echoes that. I do not want to serve. Now, Milton's hero is Christ, and he will serve. He will show in his humility and service, the path of virtue, which totally contradicts satanic logic and the logic of the pagan epic, for that matter. Because Achilles won't fight because his greatness is not being acknowledged by that crappy politician Agamemnon, who is his inferior in every sense and is not acknowledging him. So he is the great man, the great Achilles. And make no mistake, he is the great Achilles in the epic. But he is the antithesis to Milton's notion of heroism, which is presented in Christ, who, although he's very God, will make himself nothing, taking on the form of a servant, etc., right? And therefore God exalts him to the highest place, that at every name of Christ every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he's Lord, because of the humiliation, because of the condescension, and even more so because of the atonement that he will take on, right? So again, her logic here is it goes against God's logic. It is satanic logic. It's the world's logic. We can't have equality. And we can't have hierarchy, obey it in any way. But she says, this may well be, but what if God have seen and death ensue? What if God has seen? You think he hasn't seen again? Anyway, and death ensue. Oh, if death ensue, then I shall be no more. Even worse, and Adam wedded to another Eve. Shall live with her, enjoying I extinct, a death to think. Confirm then I resolve, Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. She lies to herself. She's decided, I'm going to have to kill Adam. If I'm going to endure death, then he's going to have to die as well, because otherwise I might die and there might be another Eve created and I can't even think of that. So Adam, I'm going to share this with you out of the benevolence of my heart. And then she bows down to the tree and so forth. Now he brings this to her. Hast thou not wondered, Adam, at thy stay? I'm not even going to get through this. I tarried so long here, but I really think this is so great. Hast thou not wondered, Adam, at my stay? Thee I have missed, and thought it long deprived thy presence. Agony of love till now not felt. She's a liar. She hasn't thought about him at all until this point. Boy, did I ever miss you. It's an agony till now not felt, nor shall be twice. For never more mean I to try what rash untried I sought. The pain of absence from thy sight. But strange hath been the cause, and wonderful to hear. This tree is not, as we are told, a tree of danger tasted, nor to evil unknown opening the way, but of divine effect to open the eyes and make them gods who taste, and hath been tasted such. The serpent wise, or not restrained as we, or not obeying, hath eaten of the fruit, and is become. Note how she equates all these things. Either he's wise, or not restrained as we, or not obeying, as if they were synonyms. Wise, not obeying. They're the same thing, aren't they? Hath eaten of the fruit and is become, not dead, as we are threatened, but thenceforth endued with human voice and human sense. Reasoning to admiration, and with me persuasively hath so prevailed, that I also tasted and also found the effects to correspond. I'm like a goddess in front of you. And it's bliss, and I'll grow up to Godhead, but without you I can't even think of it. So now eat of it. Can't even think of it. I've already done it. I couldn't even contemplate doing this if you're not going to be with me. So eat the fruit. I've already eaten it. Oops. But couldn't even think of it. As thou hast part to me is bliss, tedious, unshared with thee, and odious soon. I'll have to renounce my Godhead. But in case my blandishments don't prevail, you better do it or else. If it's too late, I'm maybe keep you from it. Thou therefore also taste that equal lot may join us, equal joy as equal love, lest thou not tasting different degree disjoin us, and I then too late renounce deity for thee when fate will not permit. If you don't hurry up and eat it, you're going to miss your chance. And I'm gone. I'm the goddess, and you're going to be left here, and it's too bad. She tells her story, and Adam, as soon as he heard the fatal trespass done by Eve, amazed, first of all, astonied stood, and blank, while horror chill ran through his veins and all his joints relaxed. From his slack hand the garland wreathed for Eve down dropped, and all the faded roses shed. So, the maze, I talked about the maze, I talked about the hand's got roses for Eve, his rose, and the roses have faded and they fall out of his hand. All of these amplifying poetically the effect of the broken relationship between the two. Love itself has faded here because she's left the love of God. And what does he do with her then? Because God defines love. He is in his essence love. He loves her, however. Now he's caught between two stools. And then he breaks his inward silence and he speaks to himself. O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed, holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet, how art thou lost, how on a sudden lost, defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote. Rather, how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance, how to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die. Now, Adam is made to be heroic here in his own language. I resolved to die. Did Eve resolve to die? No, she resolved to be as a god. He resolves to, he's not confused. He's not deceived. He's going to die for his bride. How can I live without thee? How forgo this, thy sweet converse and love so dearly joined, to live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God have created another Eve, and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, no, I feel the link of nature draw me. Flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe. So he chooses to be with her. And then speaks to her. And at the end of all this, he decides to be with her. To lose her were to lose his self. So Adam, and thus Eve to him replied, O glorious trial of exceeding love, says she, the sinful being who doesn't know what love is now. Illustrious evidence, example high, engaging me to emulate, but short of thy perfection. How shall I attain? Adam, from whose dear side I boast me sprung, and gladly of our union hear thee speak. One heart, one soul, and both whereof good proof this day affords, declaring thee resolved, rather than death or aught than death, more dread shall separate us, linked in love so dear. As if their love, related to each other, can be separate from the love of God. They're going to love each other, and that's now the new definition of love. Again, this is satanic logic, satanic thinking. God is love. She has flouted God, turned her back on God. Adam has said he'll die. She says, okay, this is love. This is love. This is true love. And he says it's love. I love you. But he understands it. Now, what Adam demonstrates here is a fallen mind, I think, before the fall. What choice would he have here, by the way, at this point? As I say, in the text in Genesis, Adam is with Eve. She gives him the fruit and he eats of it. Okay, so it seems like he's present. Here they're separated. Eve has taken of the fruit and he is fully aware of what's happened. What choices does he have at this point? Imagine you could rewrite the script. What could he do now?
I'm not sure how to answer your question directly, but in this scene specifically, there seems to be a big tension of choice, like choosing to die for the sake of love in a perverted sense, and also the tension of Adam still being holy and untainted by sin, and hold on, I lost my train of thought. And yeah, like just even the verse of what does light have to do with darkness. So I would have thought that Eve's evil would have repelled Adam. So I think there's just a detention there.
And the love of God would have drawn Adam. And he says the bond of nature draws me on. You're bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Yes, but he bears the image of God as well, and he knows what love is, and she's turned her back on it and so forth. So this is where I find it, theologically speaking, least plausible. But it does say in Scripture that Adam was not deceived, and yet he eats of it. So this is the challenge Milton faces, and so do we. He has separated them. The text is a little ambiguous there. It suggests that he's there, but if he's there, why isn't he speaking? He's not deceived. Okay, well then why does he eat? And Milton then says, okay, with that textual evidence, I'm going to go on that. But you're right. But I go back to my question. I agree with you, by the way. But back to my question: what could he have done differently? We know what he's going to do. What could he have done at this point? Eve is dead. She's a dead woman walking. She's turned her back on love because she's turned her back on God. So all of her professions of love towards him are meaningless. She might use the words. She contradicts the content. Well, he could pray to God. He could call on God. Since the consequence of sin is death, he could call on God, take the punishment for death on her behalf. That would be a display of love. But then there'd be no Adam. Right? And no Adam, no human race. He's not going to take Adam out of her rib then, or something like that. But we've already seen that there has to be, in the divine logic, there has to be death. Man has to die, or justice will die. Somebody has to die. It has to be somebody that doesn't deserve to die. Eve deserves to die, but justice is still not undone because Satan is won, and that's unjust as well. So something greater has to happen here than simply a person dying. That is just, but it's not going to resolve the problem of God's justice. Suggestions? I don't know. We do know what God did, which is to provide a second Adam, right? And to die for mankind. And that was the theme that Milton announced at the beginning. But yes, he could have offered himself. He could have come to God and said, what do I do here? And we don't know the answer to that. But he decides to disobey, knowing of the consequences, and that seems a greater transgression to me than the first even. And he's simply the draw of her physical nature and so forth. And he said, were it, I thought, death menaced would ensue, this my attempt, I would have sustained alone the worst, and not persuade thee, rather die deserted than oblige thee with a fact pernicious to my peace. If I could die for you, I would. Yes?
Aren't they one flesh, though? So
Yeah, what does that mean?
if she eats, isn't he already damned?
No.
No?
No.
Because in Scripture it says that they are one flesh.
It does say that.
And so if she is also bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, if she...
To whom was the command given?
Adam.
Was Eve around?
No.
So, until the
She
two...
was. You could say that she was in his rib.
listening as the rib. Yeah, right, you could, right? But that would be an unusual interpretation. It was given to him, and there's Milton's repeatedly emphasized that it was given to him and so forth. And when she does eat of it, he does eat it rather, we're told, earth trembled from her entrails, as again in pangs and nature gave a second groan, sky lowered and muttering thunder, some sad drops wept at completing of the mortal sin original. So there's a sense of, yes, she has, but it's not yet fully complete until he does it, then it is done. I don't know, it's all sort of philosophical speculation. We just know what the text says and so forth. But given I think it does matter that But both of them are contemplating at that point, well, maybe I'll do this or maybe I won't do this. Let's think around this. And they both do it, and soon thereafter, so at first he says, oh, you're wonderful, and boy, Eve, you look really hot now. I never saw you look so good, but whoa, right? And now the sinful effect of the fall, it comes in, and soon after, they see each other naked, and they realize that they're naked, and they realize they've lost something because they feel a sense of shame and guilt and anger, and they start blaming each other. And that's how book 9 concludes, with them blaming each other. And it says at the end of this, and it's a wonderful conclusion, thus they in mutual accusation spent the fruitless hours, but neither self-condemning, and of their vain contest appeared no end. Hell, discord, disunity. They're within themselves is conflict they can't resolve but through external conflict, and the external conflict still doesn't get rid of the sense of guilt in them. I haven't even got through this, but I'm done for today. But I'll come back to book 12 next time, a little bit, and then we will move on. But as I say, next time we are also going to move on to the rape of the lock. Okay, so please read on with that, and I'll see you